In this section, we'll be covering testing and special inspection, including the DSA103 form, as well as test lab oversight that's going to occur on DSA projects. The list of required structural tests and special inspections, so the TNI list, is going to be captured and submitted on the DSA103 form. This is going to be prepared by the design professional, the architect, engineer, and general responsible charge. And this will be submitted to DSA during plan review and will become part of the approved documents. Listed here in red font, I just want to point out there is a new format that we're using for the 103 form. So now it previously only showed the checked items that applied, and then it got rid of all the other non-checked items. But now in the new version, it actually lists all of the items, but just keep in mind that only the ones that have a check next to them will apply for your project. Also, the TNI list does not define the testing inspection. The plans and specs are really the ones or where you would get the test and inspection. So the TNI list really just summarizes the requirements, and we try to be thorough and make sure that it has all the items, but this last bullet kind of jokingly says it is completed by humans and is susceptible to mistakes. So always check your specs and use your judgment and experience to make sure that the list is complete and accurate. So if you ever have any doubts or questions about inspections or testing and you feel like something may be missing, recall the chain of command from the administration section of this class and run it through the design professional and then also through the DSA field engineer if needed. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, we do have a new format for the DSA 103, and in fact we might even be getting a slightly different version of this in the coming months or later this year. But so as you can see, there are checkboxes on the left side of the screen, and everything else is pretty similar to the last version from the I guess last year. So just take a look, and if the item is checked, then it applies. But there are going to be some items that still show up on the form, but if they're not checked, then they don't apply. And then at the end of the form, we still have a list of compiled reports that are going to apply for your project. So that still works the same as it did before. So you can always refer to that to see what forms are going to be and what tests are going to be required. So on the 103 form, it's going to define the type for each activity. So for test, they're all going to be noted as defined as test. But for special inspection, it could be either periodic or continuous. And usually this is defined in the code. There's some cases where it may change depending on there may be an option for periodic or continuous, but that would have to be defined on the 103 form as well. It's also going to be defining who is going to be performing each of those tasks. So the soils items a lot of times will be done by the geotechnical engineer. Those will be noted as GE. And then lab, where you see that, will mean the DSA accepted testing laboratory or the laboratory of record, also referred to. And then SI, of course, is special inspector, and PI is project inspector. Usually the project inspector is not going to be listed since most of the TNI items are going to be done by a special inspector or laboratory of record. But as mentioned previously, sometimes project inspectors do get pulled in to do some special inspections, particularly for wood and items of that nature. So here's an actual DSA 103 form that clarifies and illustrates some of the items I just mentioned on the previous slide. So you can see there are 4 columns as you get into the form. The first one is the test or special inspection item, and then the next column is the type, so that would be either periodic or continuous, and then the next column is performed by, and that would be geotechnical or lab or special inspector. And then the far column on the right indicates code references and notes. So this would just have some commentary or clarification that may be needed to help outline the testing and special inspection item. And then in the very back of the DSA103 form, you'll find the appendix that's going to have items identified by the design professional that may be exempt from special inspection and testing. So the default for this is for each of these items to be unchecked. So if there are any items that are exempt from special inspection and testing, then the design professional needs to go in there and actually check those particular items. One other thing I want to point out here is that any item that's marked as exempt also needs to be identified on the approved construction documents. This is a slight change in previous versions of the 103 form. This item about being identified on the approved construction documents was there before, but there was another option about listing the detail number on the 103 form. But that's been taken out because it really makes more sense for it to be listed on the drawings themselves or the construction documents. So just be aware of that change and make sure that that's been coordinated on the 103 form if any items are going to be exempt from testing and inspection. Any change to the TNI list or the 103 has to be done and approved by the by DSA on a CCD. So they can't just mark it out on the 103 form. It actually has to be submitted to and reviewed and approved by DSA, and that would be done on a CCD once construction starts. Any reassignments of responsibility from the project inspector to a special inspector or the other way around, vice versa, has to be approved on a revised TNI list or the 103. Also, the project inspector needs to verify that all the structural tests performed are being done only by qualified test labs. So you can refer to the DSA website for a list of qualified labs, and this includes sampling, transporting, etc. There is an exception that sampling and testing duties may be reassigned if it's approved in writing by DSA. Continuing with items for the project inspector, they need to verify that the test reports are all complete and accurate. The reports need to state whether the materials were sampled and tested per the DSA approved requirements. And they also need to state whether the materials tested are compliant with the DSA approved requirements, so whether they're conforming or non-conforming. The project inspector also needs to verify that all test reports are sent from the lab to the project inspector. I also want to make sure the lab sends the reports directly to all parties that are required. Any test, the material and structural reports, they all need to be received within 1 workday for tests that are done on-site and 7 days for tests that are done off-site. So if you don't get the reports within 7 days for the off-site test, you need to call the lab immediately. If they don't send you the reports, then you should notify the architect or the design professional, the school district, and DSA. You should write a deviation notice using the Form 154 for any deviations from the admin code section 4-335D regarding this. DSA always has the right to withdraw acceptance from the lab if they don't conform to the reporting requirements. And any errors in reporting by the test lab have to be promptly corrected. So that's the last thing that the project inspector needs to verify. Here's a sample test report template that you can find on the DSA website. So this is a compression test report. And a few things I want to point out, you can see with the items pointing to with the red arrow. I'll start on the top right and work my way around counterclockwise. So I want to make sure that it includes the correct DSA file number and application number so that it's clear what project the test report was taken from. The report also needs to be addressed to the school district, and it needs to include any specified acceptance criteria, and then it needs to state whether or not the material met that specified criteria, whether it conformed or not, was non-conforming. It also needs to state that the material was sampled and tested as required. And then the test report needs to be copied to the architect, design professional, the structural engineer, the project inspector, and then also to DSA. And that would usually happen by submitting it and uploading it to DSA box. I just want to point out that this template is not a mandatory form, but it's one that DSA would accept. However, the verified report forms, such as the 291, the 292, and the 293, those are mandatory and they have to be submitted using the proper form template. The project inspector should verify that a geotechnical verified report, the Form 293, has been received prior to placing foundation concrete. We talked about this during the administration module, and the reason being is that once the concrete's poured, you really can't verify the soil underneath. There is an exception to this for deep foundations for checking of the concrete and grout volumes that are part of the geotech verification. The project inspector is responsible for tracking all deficient materials that are identified in the test lab reports. Those should be tracked, those deviations should be tracked using the Form 154, so that would apply to the special inspection reports as well. Also, make sure to ask for the special inspection verified reports as soon as the work that they're responsible for, that special inspection work, is complete. Do not wait until the end of the project to request the welding, masonry, or other special inspection verified reports on the 292. Try to get those as soon as possible, so if there are issues, they can be addressed.